I want to welcome you to Secondary Traumatic Stress and Reflective Practice Supervision. As a reminder, in case you forgot, this was a limited seat experience. This is not open to all. Some of our webinars are. This definitely is not. So for that reason, whenever we have limited seats, we really hope that those that are able to attend do fully engage and participate, go full out, because there's a lot of great information to cover today. I want to introduce you to our presenters today, Dr. Melissa Bernstein and Al Killen Harvey. Did I pronounce that correctly, Al?
You did perfectly.
I've always heard about you as the famous Al, but I didn't know how to pronounce your last name until I saw it. And I said, oh, I've never heard someone say his last name before.
I've been called a lot of things in my life, so you got a pretty broad range there, so no worries.
Okay. And if you'll advance me to the next slide, this is my favorite part. This is when I get to brag about the people that we acquire for these trainings, because we're always so impressed by the subject matter experts we have the opportunity to partner with, and today is no exception. So we want to thank Dr. Melissa Bernstein. We want to thank Al for being here. If you have been to Caltrin trainings, we call her around here Dr. Mel Byrne, as she's known on Twitter, is well known around the Caltrin training circles because she's provided some valuable content for us before. And we're so grateful to have you back with us. And Al, listen, I feel like a long time coming. We've been waiting to have you in one of these trainings for a while. So we're so excited, and I can go on and on and on for the next 90 minutes about how wonderful they are. But I'm going to let you see that for yourself and pass the baton and welcome you to today's training. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jess. I wish we could have you for every training that we do. Such a nice introduction. And I really liked the term you used, which is let's go full on. I think that is a really good kind of motto for our time together today. We're really excited to be here with you all talking about this really important topic of secondary trauma and how the work that we all do has an impact on us. And not just that it has an impact on us, but then what can we do about it? So that is what we're going to be focusing on today, is this idea of reflective practice and reflective supervision as one way to start addressing the impact that this work has on us from an organizational perspective, right? We've known about secondary trauma. We know this work has an impact on us. We've known this for a while, but only recently have we and organizations really started to dedicate time and resources to doing something about it. I think for a long time, we've heard self-care, take care of yourself, which we're big proponents of, but really trying to take it that step further and thinking about what can we do within our organizations, since we know that this work does have an impact. All right. Okay, so we're going to dive right in. We're going to start by talking about secondary traumatic stress a little bit and its impact that it has on us, and then we'll shift in our kind of second half to talking about reflective supervision. So I already see some head shaking, so we'll just get into it. So I'm throwing this quote up here. I'm going to show you two quotes, then we're going to kind of talk about it a little bit. So this first one says, if you're tough enough and you're cool enough and you're committed to your cause enough, you'll keep on keeping on. You'll suck it up. Self-care, that's for the weaker set, right? So this is kind of this first sentiment. Then we have this other sentiment. So again, I'm going to read this quote to you all, just because I think it's really powerful. So the expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to walk through water without getting wet. Right? So this is a quote from a book called Kitchen Table Wisdom. And you see there are two very different sentiments. So we'd love to start by just hearing from you all. I should have mentioned this earlier, but if you do have the ability, we know some, not all do, but to share your camera so we can see your lovely faces, that would be wonderful. If not, we understand that as well. And for our conversations, you can use the chat feature if that feels comfortable to you, but please also feel free to unmute yourself. We'd love to hear your voice as well. So thinking about those two quotes, kind of suck it up, this is how the job is, and this other quote here. I'd love to hear for folks their thoughts about this. Which quote kind of resonates more with folks and why?
I can go, Melissa.
Erica.
So I'm a family advocate and I work with other advocates. So I've seen both of the spectrum. The second one really connects with me, but I've heard my other advocates say, it's a roller coaster. This is the job. You just deal with it. So I see both perspectives because everyone's so different in how they handle it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Erica. I really appreciate that. And I think you're right. I think what we do see out there is that both sentiments might still exist. I think our hope is that we're kind of shifting from that first kind of sentiment, that idea that this is just part of the job. It's inevitable. Nothing you can do about it. But I think what you'll hear from us today is that that's not something we really believe in, right? That there is something that we can do. So I see in the chat, I think someone was about, Lan, I think you were about to share.
I was say I do self-care trainings for providers as well as for parents, and really having the mindset of the second quote is what we want them all to have, and that's where we get the most pushback. But by the end of the time, I think it's just that realization of chunking it down into small pieces so that they see just little self-care things can help with this a lot, that you don't have to get soaked all the time. You don't have to feel that soaked feeling, but understanding that sprinkles do happen. And so how do you sprinkle it down versus the full-on soaking as you go through?
Mm-hmm.
Thanks so much, Lan. I appreciate you continuing the water analogy. That's helpful. But I think you're right. This can feel overwhelming. And so we'll talk about ways to kind of break that down as well.
And just as a teaser for coming comments that we're going to make, one of the other things that we're going to really underscore is that the message that is being disseminated to the staff can be done verbally, but it's also done through modeling. So they're watching you. They're watching how leadership is doing this and taking their cue as to how do you handle these sorts of things, in what ways do you set the limits, in what ways do you protect yourself, and in what ways do you provide that for the rest of the staff. So Melissa's going to talk a lot more about that when she gets into the other aspects of STS, but I just wanted to give you a little heads up. We're gonna flip the mirror onto you a little bit as well, because you are crucial in all of this.
Thanks, Al. So I see in the chat too, folks are really resonating with the second quote for sure, which again is the hope. That's why we're here, right? We want, the fact that we can think this work doesn't evoke difficult feelings is just unrealistic, right? The work we do is challenging, and we want to normalize that this is a part of the work that we do. And if we recognize that, and we know that this is a part of the work that we do, and it impacts our organizations, then we have a responsibility to do something about that, right? Great, okay. Okay, so we're just gonna do a little bit of background here around secondary trauma. We know there's kind of two ways that we can be exposed to trauma in the work that we do. One is directly, right? So maybe experiencing an assault or feeling like we're in extreme danger ourselves, which can happen, but more commonly what happens is we're exposed to that indirect trauma, which we're talking about today. And so that can feel like or seem like hearing kids or caregiver stories of the difficult and scary things that happen to them, reading information about children and families being harmed or mistreated, right? And when we're talking about indirect trauma and we're talking about the ways that we can experience it, this is something that all individuals in an organization can experience. Sometimes we think, oh, it might just be the folks that are working closely with kids and families, but in fact, all individuals in an organization, from folks at the front desk, from clerical staff up to leadership, this is something that can really impact everyone in an organization, right? Just like when we think about child trauma, we know it can impact not just that kiddo, but everyone in that family, right? Trauma has a context to it. So you'll see a lot of similarities as we talk about the impact that trauma has on us and our organizations as to the impact that trauma has on kids and families. There's really a parallel that we'll try and highlight here. All right, so we're just going to get into a little bit of terminology here just because there's a lot of terms out there and sometimes it can get a bit confusing. So there's also different types of stress that we can experience in our work. One of those is this, it's a term burnout. I'm sure it's, folks have really been hearing this term lately. This is what we like to think about as that organizational stress. So it's what we think of as that workplace stress, the commuting to work, the paperwork, the time crunch, the salary, the workplace culture, right? And no matter where you work, Whole Foods, dentist's office, family resource center, all organizations experience this type of stress, right? It kind of comes with jobs, this organizational stress. Then for folks in our field, in the helping profession, we have an additional kind of layer of stress, that interpersonal stress, because our work is interpersonal, right? And so these terms are things like compassion fatigue, secondary trauma, vicarious trauma. You might have heard these terms before. So compassion fatigue is kind of, we think about this broad impact of working in our field and working closely with folks that have experienced trauma, just this kind of general depletion of our ability to cope and a reduced empathy. I think what the folks in the field is talking about the most and what has kind of risen to the surface is this idea of secondary trauma, which is very similar to this idea of vicarious trauma. And when we say secondary trauma, what we really mean is this emotional strain, this emotional stress that we as helping professionals involved in caring for traumatized kids and families can experience, right? It's the toll it takes on us to really bear witness to that suffering. And like I mentioned before, that can be true for all folks in an organization that support and care for kids who've experienced trauma. So just take a second to look at this picture here. See some smiles, which is what we hope for. So again, when we think about child trauma and its impacts, we know that trauma can impact the way kids see the world around them, right? It's the same for us too as helping professionals. The stress that we experience in our work can also impact not only how we interact in our workplace with the clients and families that we serve, but outside as well, right? So in this picture you see here, jokingly, this cute little tiger thinks that tail is a snake, right? Which really means there's danger everywhere, right? And so we can start to have that mindset too. Again, thinking about the work that we do really does have an impact on us, not just, again, how we engage with clients and families if we're feeling stressed. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but also how we function outside, right? How it can have this broader impact on us. Okay, so we just want to highlight that we are not alone in this. There are many, many different fields who are experiencing stress as a result of supporting those who are experiencing trauma. You can see here, this slide really just shows that studies within the last decade really show these high rates of secondary trauma and burnout across different professionals. And I think this is really important to highlight. Again, if we think about that parallel between child trauma, what's really helpful is letting kids know they're not alone, that what they're experiencing, what they're feeling, it's common. Other kids and families who have gone through difficult things also have these difficult feelings. The same thing for us as well, that we're not alone in experiencing, stress and traumatic stress as a result of the work that we do. Okay. So here we just wanted to share, these are some ways, some thoughts and feelings, reactions that folks have. And I just would like for you guys to take a second to review this list. I won't read them out loud to you guys, but just look this over. And we're going to do a kind of an anonymous poll here in a second. So actually, I'm going to keep this slide up so you can see it. And Jess, if you can launch that poll. This is anonymous, so we won't know your answer. It'll just be a large response here. So again, thinking about on the last 6 months, how do you experience at least 3 of these symptoms? So we see those answers coming in. Got half above. Wait for a little more participation. All right, got over 90%. So we're just going to end the poll here. I'm going to share the results, and I bet I'll get a little chuckle from Al. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing our screen for a second so just we can have a conversation, and then we'll go ahead and share that too. All right. All right, so we see here about 70% of folks said yes. And we are smiling a little bit because we've done this poll with thousands of people now at this point, and it's really the same results that we see from across the board, no matter who we're just giving this presentation to. But I'd love to hear from you all, is, you know, your reactions to those numbers. Is that something that's surprising? Is it what you thought? I'd just love to hear your thoughts. Again, feel free to chat, but feel free to unmute yourself as well.
Seeing lots of facial expressions. I'd love to hear words that go with that. Carrie, it looks like you might have clicked in there.
Yeah. I just want to share something really quick that just goes along with this. Yesterday was an especially stressful day at work. I also manage a homeless program that gives me a lot of secondary trauma. And so I had a day, and I'm on my way home from work, and my husband calls to let me know that the hinges that we bought for our kitchen don't work. And I had a complete and total meltdown over the fact that the hinges were the wrong size. Didn't cry all day long over all of the stuff that was happening, but that's what made me fall apart.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Carrie, can I follow up on that? Is it okay?
Please.
Yeah. So you're implying something there, and I'm going to ask you to put some more words to it. So you're saying to us, boy, this seemingly little thing, and yet that's the one that put me over. Why do you think that is? How come?
Because I had to kind of keep it together all day long. You know, like I had to respond to the things that were happening in a professional way, and I couldn't fall apart. And I felt safe with my husband that I could fall apart. Poor guy.
Wow.
Yeah, so it seeps into your home, even though you try, you know, not to have that happen. You know,
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. And Lana in the chat used the word snowball, right? There's a snowball effect, and that's what we were hearing you describe, right? So it's not necessarily the incident itself that causes you to kind of finally had it. It's the accumulation over time when there hasn't been an opportunity to kind of take some of the air out of the balloon all along the way, right? And then it just pops all of a sudden. You also mentioned another very significant piece that we'll talk about when we get to the reflective practice, which was, but when you were able to finally let it go, was when you determined you were in a safe place to do that with somebody and that's the good news and the bad news of being our partners, right? They become the safe space for us. And so they get it all. But that's very wise. And we're going to talk about how do we replicate that in the workforce? Because what happens is so many of us end up in the position like you, which is we have to take it home. And it's only at home that we're allowed to kind of talk about it and process it. And many times it's so convoluted by that point in time that our partners have learned to just kind of let her go, whatever happens here. But we are really going to advocate for that there should be ways for us to be able to let that air out at work in a meaningful, safe way. So I really appreciate you letting us know that. Thank you so much.
And I'll just note that we also see a lot of folks resonating with that in the chat as well. Really resonating with this idea of the impact that the work has outside of the work and how it impacts us in our relationships and our interactions with others.
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. I did notice as well somewhere in the chat that one of the responses was, I'm not surprised, but I'm glad to see I'm not alone, right? And we hear that a lot as well. And that I think also speaks to something really kind of interesting about this, right? This is the big elephant in the room in all the organizations that we work in, right? None of us are surprised by that number, but how seldom is it actually talked about in the places that we work? But everybody knows it's going on. Everybody knows we are immersed in this and we are feeling these kinds of emotional stressors, but very few of us have a place in which we can acknowledge that openly and overtly and talk about it. And so that I think that comment of I'm not surprised, but I don't feel so alone now really speaks to that idea. So many of us carry it internally. And many of us, those of us particularly, I'm going to use old school psychology babble, many of us who are more neurotically oriented, many of us see it as a failing on our part as well. boy, if I was better at my job, I wouldn't have these feelings. Look at all those other people that do their job so well and they don't seem to have that stuff going on. So I mustn't have figured out how to do this, or maybe this is the wrong job for me. That's what starts to happen when we're not talking about this with each other. We begin to blame ourselves and see ourselves as the failure.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share the screen again. I'm testing my technical limits here. All right. Okay, can everyone see that? Are we good? Okay. So, you know, I think this idea, as we all talked about, we resonate with this idea that the work impacts us, right? This is something that we understand. And now we're going to kind of shift into thinking about what can we do about this? And as Al said, in our organizations, right? And so we just like to throw this kind of comic up here, I think, because for a long time, we really have heard self-care, pizza parties, things like this. And they're great. I mean, I would never discourage you guys from having pizza parties or taking care of yourself, figuring out what it is. And I think that's our own individual responsibility too, right? To figure out how we do take care of ourselves. Maybe we drive a little longer before we enter that house at the end of that day if we know we're feeling really dysregulated. But to some extent, I think this focus on just self-care has also limited the serious impact that traumatic stress can have on us as healthcare professionals. And it's also putting the onus on us, the ones that are struggling, to find our own solutions. So really, how can we think a bit bigger and think, what are there other ways that maybe our organizations can support us in dealing with the stress that we experience? I like Rita's comment. It's tragically hilarious. That was absolutely great. Okay.
And I'm gonna, if I could, Melissa, I'm gonna draw the kind of parallel process. I don't do very much self-disclosure in my trainings, but I will disclose a little bit of my shameful past here. I was an accountant in a former life before I became a social worker. So I worked for corporate America for a number of years. And it's interesting in the manufacturing field. It's interesting how I observed that safety issues are so rigidly protected in the manufacturing world. We have federal and state and local, and many times even just within the organization, organizational guidelines for how to produce something if there is any risk of physical harm to the employee who's doing it. And the company has to verify that the employees are trained, that they're protected, that they're given the safety equipment to do their job. I mean, that is all just sort of codified. It's all built into both law and practice. We work, most of us in the fields that we work in, the equipment we're working with is our emotions and feelings. That's our tools. That's what we use. And where's the safety for that? Where's the guidelines to help us protect that part of ourselves? Where's the mandate that says we don't put people out on that line unless they're trained, they're aware, and they're protected all the time around their emotional state? There's been this huge discrepancy around that. And in our social service professions, it's been left to us to kind of come up with our own personal protective gear. And we really think that that dynamic needs to shift, because it is partly our responsibility to take care of ourselves, but it is not solely our responsibility. Our organizations, agencies, and our collective professions have a real obligation to help take care of us as well. I promise that's the last preachy part I will do, but it gets channeled every once in a while.
But we can. So we just want to give you a big picture here before kind of diving into the strategy that we'll spend the next hour together talking about. There are, as we've mentioned together, different ways to help take care of ourselves. So we talked about those individual strategies, which are part of the solution, that self-care, maybe taking that time off that you need. Those are really important. And then we're talking here about some organizational strategies. There are things like training, things like this together, talking about normalizing that we all experience something together and that it's a normal human part of our work. That is really powerful. And that's really powerful for our organizations and for our staff to have them have that opportunity. So that's kind of one way we can think about it organizationally. Another thing that folks might be a bit familiar with is this idea of crisis debriefing. So this is this idea of providing emotional and psychological support immediately following a traumatic event that happens. Let's say there's a death or other kind of critical incidents that occur. It's really meant to be short term, typically about one session. And again, it occurs after the crisis has happened, after that stress is already activated in that individual. Reflective supervision, which we'll dive into here soon and we'll learn about today, is something that can really be put in place and practiced throughout the organization in kind of day-to-day practices to really support folks in dealing with the stress before it becomes unmanageable, right? And that time needs to be taken off. So it's really a practice of like proactively welcoming the emotions around the work into the workspace so that they can feel manageable. And I go back to Al's comment about letting the air out of the balloon a little bit, right? This is a space to do that. This can be a space to do that. And that's what we'll talk about.
I'd like to add, as we make the shift over to supervision, and we're going to talk about this very specific sort of skill set. Melissa, could we go back to the last slide for a second, just so I remind myself what I want to bring up here. We are going to talk about the reflective process in a second, but I want you to look at that individual strategy section for a moment as well. And my understanding is, correct me if I'm wrong, but most of you on this call are in some sort of leadership, supervisory, managerial role of some sort or another, correct? Yeah, okay. So I want you to look at that side from two sides of the coin. One as an employee of your organization, regardless of your title, and then one as a leader in your organization. And in what ways do you or do you not take care of the individual side first? We're going to talk about organizationally in a minute, but they're connected. How often do you take time off? How often do you let people know, I've got limits to what I can do? When I clock out, I'm done, unless of course there is an emergency in the work that we do that sometimes can happen. But by and large, I'm done. Are you one of those folks who sends emails to staff at 8 o'clock at night, Saturday morning, Sunday afternoon, right? And I understand, being in leadership myself in the past, I understand that may be the only time that I'm able to actually focus on following up my emails because I'm so under stress from all the other things I have to do during the week. I get that. But think about the message that sends out to staff then as well. Before we even get into what we as an organization need to do to support them, we've already set out a model that says, in order to be in leadership here, you don't take care of yourself. You work round the clock, you don't take time off, you don't take vacations, you're sending emails from home. That's the modeling that we're doing. And that's why many times individual staff members have a difficult time in taking care of themselves, because the underlying non-spoken message is, ooh, that's not how you get ahead in this organization, because that's not what I'm seeing everybody else do. So just think about the power of your role modeling within that, let alone the importance of taking care of yourself. You're going to need that energy in order to do some of these other things that we're now suggesting that leadership also do to take care of the rest of the staff. So I hope that resonated in some way, that again, that parallel process. Even things like, as somebody mentioned, sometimes your role doesn't allow you to do certain things. Things like sending an email, I understand, again, if that has to happen at night or on a weekend. But there also is, in most people's email servers, there is an ability to delay when it gets sent. So if you're going to do it at Saturday at noon, you can have it sent Monday at 8 a.m. So that's when the employee gets it. Because trust me, the employees are looking at when that email was sent out and making a calculation in their head. So there are ways to work around this if you really want to be a model and be clear about the modeling that you're giving to your staff. So thanks for that. Thanks, Melissa, I appreciate it. So now let's talk about what can the organization do? That it's not just the employees. Employees need to take time off. They need to ask for time off. Employees need to tell us when they've kind of reached that place that they're at. That's all stuff that employees have to do for themselves and that we can't do for them. But there are some things we can do for them. We're calling this reflective supervision. We really want to broaden the idea. We're going to really talk today about reflective practice. For some of you, you may not do formal supervision. So we want you to know that everything that we're going to talk about here can be incorporated into a variety of ways in which you lead and direct your organization. It doesn't have to be, nor should it be, only done in traditional kind of supervision. It can be done in lots of other ways. So we're going to use that term very, very loosely. I just wanted you to know that going into it as you think through it. So next slide, please, Melissa. Thanks. So we're calling this reflective practice or reflective supervision. Some of you may be familiar with that term. You may have heard it. The term itself is relatively new. The concept behind it is not new at all, but the term is relatively new. But regardless of whether or not you've heard it, the reflective supervision before, when you hear it now, what comes to mind? When you hear the word reflective in this reflective practice or supervision, what do you think? Let's do primary process. Just throw in the chat box for me. You hear reflective, don't edit, don't screen. What does reflective mean to you? What comes up for you when you hear reflective? Looking back, somebody said. Really listening, somebody said. It's a mirror of you and your practices. Mirroring. Great. These are great responses. Give you one more second case. Processing the thoughts and feelings that come up for you in the context of your work. And again, the word mirroring. Awesome. Great. Super. We've got the advanced class here, Melissa, so, which is what we thought. So thank you so much. All of that, absolutely, all of that fits. When we are talking about a reflective practice, we really are looking at a twofold kind of concept. First and foremost, do we give ourselves or our staff, depending on how we're applying this, do we give our organizational employees an opportunity themselves to reflect on the emotions and feelings that come with the work that they do? So that's the first part of the reflective process. Is there an opportunity? And I'm going to borrow a little bit from Carrie's terminology with her husband or partner, which is that she decided when she went home, it's because he was a safe person. Do we create a safe space within our work environment where staff can say at times, I did my job, I followed the procedure, and let me also tell you, it sucked. I didn't feel great. I had to make that report, and I did it in a timely way. And I know ultimately that is for the protection of this kid, and I still feel like, ugh, because of that. Is there a place to go to describe that, to talk about that, to let the staff just sit back for a moment and take that in? That there is more to my job than just following the procedure. It invariably is going to pull on my own feelings, emotions. And I need to own and respect that. There's nothing wrong with that as this relates to my work. The second part of reflection is that reflection can be most powerful when there is someone there to reflect it back. So it's great when we can have that conversation ourselves. Putting words to it is powerful, but hearing it through somebody else after I've said it really many times helps us kind of either hear it at a deeper level or clarify or find new words for it. So this is where we as the supervisor, the manager, the leader come in. So we're encouraging a staff member to say, I did my job, and boy, there were parts of it that were just really hard. And then our reflection back is, what I heard you say to me is you're proud of what you did in following the procedure, but that there was emotions that came up for you when you did it. Did I get that right? We're not interpreting it. We're not criticizing it. We're not judging it. We're just saying, this is what I heard back from you. This is what I thought I heard. Did I get that right? So we're going to give you in a few minutes a demonstration of what this looks like, because it's many times we find it's easier when you see it in play than when we try to just sort of reduce it to bullet points on a PowerPoint slide. But I want you to keep in mind those two aspects of reflective practice, because they are equally important and powerful. The opportunity for somebody to be able to emotionally reflect on the work that they do, and the opportunity for somebody else to hear it and mirror it back to them. Not literally word for word, but generally this is what I heard, to see if you've really gotten the essence of what was there. Before we get into more details around that, let me just explain a couple of things of what reflective practice is not. because we oftentimes meet a lot of resistance when we were first introducing this to organizational leaders, and we understand why. Reflective practice or reflective supervision is not psychotherapy. It is not counseling. It is not intended to be. It is dangerous if we get into that terrain. It is inappropriate for that to be happening in the workplace environment, unless that is your job. That is not what it's intended to do. It's intended to provide a space for staff and us to talk about the emotions and feelings related to the job that we do. And that's the key component. So I may talk about my frustration, my sadness, my joy, my passion related to what I'm doing on the job, the thing you are asking me to do as my employer. It is not how I feel about my mother, my partner, my kids, the world at large. You know, it is not those kinds of places, even though at times there may be some overlap there, and we'll talk about what happens when that's there. But the focus is on the feelings that come up as a result of the work we're asking you to do. And as long as we stay within that sort of parameter, we're good. We're good to go. That is totally appropriate for us to be talking about in our work environment, because it is an element of the work that we're asked to do. That also we find sometimes when I make that clarification at the beginning, takes a lot of the pressure off of the leader, the supervisor, the manager. You're not here to help them understand the deeper psychological origins of what's going on. You're here to just allow them to acknowledge that it's happening. We'll talk in a little while when it's your thought, or part of what might be helpful is to encourage somebody to do that deeper sort of work, and how we might suggest that to someone else. But that's not what we're suggesting is your role as the leader or the manager. Does that make some sense for folks? Yeah? Okay, I'm seeing some heads nod, so great. I really appreciate that. So I've been putting a lot of onus on supervisors, leaders, and managers, right? Saying, you know, this is part of what we're going to talk about, how you do this. So let's kind of tail back to, why should it even be a responsibility of a supervisor? Why are we adding this to your already incredibly full plate of things that you are trying to do as an organizational leader? Any thoughts as to why we're now suggesting that we also think that it's incumbent upon leadership and supervisors to provide a reflective space? How come? Again, you can use chat, or if you'd like to speak, just let us know, or just start talking.
My name is Anne Marie, and I'm the program manager for our parent education and our family resource center, our CAPC, and outreach. So I think the biggest thing that I would take away from this is that we want to have a team, one, as you said, to reflect and model for, but also for their own health and mental well-being, not just to serve the company in the sense of having retention, but to not create additional traumas. Most of us have come into this work score high on the ACEs scale already, and the triggering that they receive during a visit or home visitation or a parenting program can be very damaging to them emotionally, and if they're bringing it home to their family as well. And so we talk about it in reflective supervision, and the goal that what can they use that emotion for, and how can they redirect it in a positive way that helps their client and doesn't have such a lasting impact on them. And then you're right, referring them now to therapy if it's something that's beyond our scope.
I really appreciate, Anne-Marie, how you described that. You did a beautiful job. So I'm going to keep minimum words because I'll butcher what you did. It was really beautifully put. And I heard you talking about, for you and your organization, that the overall well-being of your staff is paramount for you. And you see this as an aspect of that. This is one of the ways that we address the overall well-being. And you understand the trickle effect of that.
And I think I would add to that just really quick is that I don't expect my parent educators or home visitors to give anything to our client that they're not also receiving in-house. It's not right. I can't send them out in the field to do that.
Could we just take that clip, Melissa, and make it a slide on our, and I don't know if you noticed some head nodding and applause, and Marie as well. Absolutely. And yet many times that is what's happening, right? Many times we put the onus on our staff to provide this incredibly high, intensive, emotionally available support to the clients that we serve. Meanwhile, we do nothing to supply them with that same sort of support. They somehow are supposed to get it from somewhere to be able to go out and do it. And we know that that's not possible. Over time, there is a price we pay for expecting that. If nobody's feeding me, I've got nothing to give somebody else. We just know that, we do. And that is the way many times that we see this. As organizational leaders, again, I can put on my business person's hat here as well, and talk about ways in which talking about this from a business point of view and even a bottom line point of view. That when staff do the kind of work that they do in our organizations that we work for, some of the indicators of secondary traumatic stress and burnout are things like higher sick time, longer vacation times, higher rates of people leaving the job or the careers early, which means that we have to retrain and rehire, which is incredibly expensive and costly. Additionally, a lack of real sort of focus and ability to be completely present with our clients, which means I may also not just maybe miss something minor, miss something major, which could result in some significant degree of potential liability to the client and for the organization, all of which could cost us money. So if we want to argue this from a dollars and cents point of view, we can do that as well. We can easily do that as well. And that's always been one of the interesting things when I talk particularly in child advocacy centers and mental health services about providing actual real supervision for the staff, and management comes back and says, we are stretched so thin, we don't have the money to do that. I can't afford to have staff in supervision every single week. And my suggestion back to them is, let's take a look at how much you're paying not to have them in. What's your turnover rate? How many times have we had an oops happen with a client? How much of your staff are sick when they're not physically sick? They are just too emotionally burned out to come into work. You're already paying a price for this. So do you want to pay it on the back end, or do you want to pay it up front and maybe get a better return for investment, which is you got staff that stay with you longer, do quality work, and feel good and balanced about what they do. So some of the ways we sort of look at that. So thanks so much. Did I miss anything in the chat, Melissa?
Yeah, just I'd like to highlight similar sentiments to what you shared, that it's reflective supervision can build trust, which improves attendance, productivity, and services to families. And we know the literature shows that as well, that relationship and supervision is what keeps people in their jobs. And so it's a really, really important piece. Reflective supervision helps support the success of a team as well, right? So that individual in their work, but also that team focus. And then Laura commented that this has been even more challenging recently with the pandemic and all that we're asking of our staff, which is taking a tremendous personal challenges while also trying to be available. I think so we've all, which is interesting because I think something that maybe Al and I have noticed is, you can call it kind of a silver lining of the pandemic, is that we can no longer ignore that feelings come into the work we have, right? We all went through this global trauma, this global experience together, and we couldn't not talk about that. And so I think we see that the importance of supporting our staff emotionally, especially because of this pandemic.
Yeah, it was fascinating how it sort of blew the lid off this whole sort of facade we were doing. As long as I'm going to start talking about my feelings about COVID, I'm going to start talking about my feelings about a lot of things that have been going on here. And that's sort of what has happened. And that's kind of a mini version of Carrie's thing, right? It's that metaphor of we collectively were holding this for so long, and then there was finally this other thing that just blew it all open. And now people are just saying, nope, I can't do this any longer. Something's got to change here. Something's got to shift. And we're seeing that happen, across disciplines, but certainly within social service arena for sure in large numbers. Okay, so yep.
Forward, is that good? Do you need these slides, or we're good?
No, you know me.
And then before we get to this part, I just want
to slides are a necessary evil. I never follow the script. I really, really apologize. But I promise you, everything that I talk about is on those slides, and we will get them to you. They just come out in a quirkier way when Melissa lets me run. So go ahead.
And I would like to just to highlight Eva's comment because I really like this languaging, which is really important. So this approach of the whole child, whole family, whole staff. And that's so powerful. I really like that language, thinking about, the entirety of everyone. And so I appreciate that language. Okay, I'll pass it back to you, Al.
Thanks. No, thanks so much. I'm glad you're keeping track of all those. Those comments are wonderful. Thank you so much for participating with us and talking with us either verbally or through chat. That's really energizing for Melissa and I. It really helps us. So now, as we mentioned, I can talk some more about kind of the logistics of what reflective practice or supervision looks like, but sometimes it's easier when you get a little flavor of it and get to see it, and then we can kind of deconstruct it to see what some of the pieces are underneath. So with your permission and with somebody's incredible generosity, we're going to do that. So first of all, Melissa, if we can take the slide down and go back to seeing everyone's faces, that would be awesome. And we get my thing in gallery view. There we are. Oh, wonderful. Oh, look at you all. Oh, wonderful. Lovely. Thank you. All right, let me describe to you. We're going to need a volunteer here in a second. You will not be put in a box and cut in half. I promise. I gave up that career a long time ago. So we're going to do some other kind of demonstration here instead. But let me tell you what you're getting into before I ask if you'd be willing to do it. We are, for about 8 or 10 minutes, I'm going to ask somebody to have just a conversation with me about the job that you do. I'm not asking you to role play. I'm not asking you to be somebody or highlight some specific thing. I literally am just going to ask you some questions that relate to the work that you do. So I get a better understanding of what it is and a bit of what the emotional kind of component of the work that you have. It will be just you and I having a conversation. Obviously, everybody else in the room will be watching it and observing it, so you need to be aware of that. I will not be asking you about anything of a personal nature, meaning about your family of origin, or any of that. If I inadvertently ask a question that somehow in your mind kind of goes to that place, I'm going to ask you to flag that and make it clear to me so that we don't go there, because that's not the intention of this in any way. So it really is just for me to demonstrate a few reflective questions so the rest of the folks can see what those may look like. When we're done, again, so that you are clear, we're going to ask people to comment on what they saw specifically in terms of my role with you. We're not going to ask them to comment on anything that you said. So your answers are off the table for the conversation. It's a matter of what did I ask? How did I ask it? What would that be like to ask your own staff? So the subject of the next 10 minutes are my absolute favorite subject, which is me. So I'm going to ask you to just focus on me and not somebody else. So I just say all of that just so you understand the parameters and the boundaries there that I hope make it feel a little bit more comfortable. We've done this countless numbers of times now, Melissa. No one has ever died that we know of while they were doing the demonstration, nor has anybody ever really said it's been a bad experience. Most people really have enjoyed the process. So we'll throw that out there as our little bit of marketing. So I think I hope I've sold it well enough. Let's see if we've got any volunteers. So would anyone be willing to just have a brief conversation with me for the next 8 or 10 minutes? And Melissa, I'm going to let you take care of the thousands of people that will want to do this and figuring out who we're going to go.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, if you could just raise your hand or just unmute yourself, and that would be great.
Jessica knows I tend to step back in these situations because I'm not hesitant to step forward. So I'm going to wait. And if you don't get anybody, I'll be happy to.
Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Emery. So anyone else?
I feel the same, Emery. Yeah. Although I would love to participate in this.
All right.
Yeah. Sold.
I think that was the key word. Okay. We got it, Carrie. You win.
Right.
Win or lose. We'll find out. You let us know whether you think you win when we're
okay.
done here. All right. So a couple of things. First of all, Carrie, for you and I, thank you so much. I'm going to make a suggestion if you can. Do you know how to pin on Zoom? Do you know what that means? If you look at, if you hover over where your box is with your face in it, there's a little blue box up in the right corner with 3 dots. Mm-hmm. Do you see that? If you click that, it will say one of the options it will give you is pin. And if you do that, actually what you're going to want to do is do that over mine. I'm sorry, forgetting what you're doing here. So go to mine, look over there, do pin. And if
wait.
you do pin, you should see.
I'm all of a sudden really big and.
Right. That's because
Okay.
you did yours.
Because I did
Okay.
mine. So how do I get out of mine?
Yep. Just go back, go over mine, actually. If you go
Oh.
over mine, it'll supersede it.
Okay.
Go to the 3 dots.
I got to find you. Where are you? Where did you go?
Carrie, if you go
There
to
you
down-
are. There
yeah.
you are. Okay.
Got it?
Replace pin. Okay. Got
Got
it.
it? Do you have me now?
Yep.
Yeah, I should have warned you. You got me on the big screen. All right. Another thing I'm going to ask is folks that are watching, just for the next 10 minutes, if you could and would, if you would take your videos off. So just stop video for us. It'll make it a little easier because we still see a little bit of everybody's face up there otherwise. And so that'll make it a little bit easier for Carrie and I to feel like we're just in a room together without. But Carrie, you know full well people are watching us, so I want you to be aware of that. Okay, great. Thank you so much for that. So again, Carrie, before we start, just want to remind you a couple other things. Again, in about 8 or 10 minutes, we'll have this conversation. I'll let you know when we've only got a couple minutes left, so you know we're kind of wrapping up. Again, I'm just going to ask you about what you do and a couple other questions related to that. If I ask anything that for any reason feels not okay for you or a place you don't want to go, all you have to do is say, let's pass on that one. I don't want to talk about that, or that's not okay, and I will move along. It is not my intention to go there, but I could inadvertently have that happen. Okay? Does that feel comfortable for you?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right, great. Okay, so let's start. First and foremost, Carrie, again, thanks so much for doing this with me. Tell me, if you could please, Carrie, a little bit kind of the elevator speech about what your job is in a nutshell. What is it that you do?
Okay, I am the Family Advocate Services Director for the Link Family Resource Center. So I have 12 family advocates that serve throughout the county of San Luis Obispo. I also am the program director for a medically fragile homeless program. So we have 6 beds that we house medically fragile homeless and individuals and sometimes families, not sometimes, and families, while they are recuperating from something.
Okay, thank you so much. So what I heard is that you oversee a staff of 12 family advocates in one component of your work as a director. In another component, you work with a population that are medically fragile, and there are 6
beds, so they're
6
homeless.
beds.
Yeah.
Great.
Right.
Absolutely. And you're the director of that program. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. Super. And how long have you been doing this work, Carrie?
For the medically fragile homeless, about 1.5 years. And as the director of the family advocates, I celebrated 1 year in January.
Wow. Congratulations on both
Thank you.
those fronts. So I heard you say 1.5 years for medically fragile, and then in the other component, just over 1 year now as the director, correct? Okay, great. Have you done work in the social service arena previous to this, Carrie?
Yes,
Yeah.
I had a long career in the Head Start program doing parent involvement. And then I actually was a strategies trainer, a statewide strategies trainer here in California for 8 years. So I did training like you're doing. Yeah.
Great, great. So again, a long career in Head Start, and a good chunk of time, part of the role that you did was as a trainer and a training specialist. Awesome. From what you've described to me so far, Carrie, the work that you do involves a lot of interface with people with lots of needs, physical and emotional, I would guess. Is that correct?
In the homeless program, yes. As the advocate director, the family advocates are the boots on the ground doing the work. So my job is to support them. So I don't do direct services with families. I support the advocates.
Great. So you thank you for that clarification. So you're not doing direct work, but you do support the advocates who are on sort of the front lines around all of that, right? So as such, you absorb a lot of what they are experiencing as well.
Yes.
So I have sort of a kind of a big question for you, if I could. What drew you to do this kind of work in general? Because that you're putting yourself out there and making yourself vulnerable in many ways. What drew you to do that, Carrie?
Wow, that's a really powerful question. I've always been drawn to working with families. I had a little tiny part of my life that I worked with corporate America, and it just sucked the life right out of me. So it's like, I've got to get back into the service field, because that's where, even though it is emotionally draining, that's where I get my energy.
So again, I heard you say that you've always been drawn to families. You had a little deviation there for a while and tried corporate America, and it just didn't do it for you. And yet this is where you get your energy. Did I get that right word, Carrie?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Can you tell me a little more about what that means to you, that this is where you get your energy? Can you describe that for me?
When I see the work, well, I've done direct service work. I started out as a family advocate in the Head Start program. I don't even want to mention how many years ago. So when you do get to feel like you've done something that has made a difference, when you've been able to help a family really kind of tap into their own strength, you know, because when I started out, I was young, and it's like, I'm going to save the world. And of course, you learn that that's not your job. Your job is to help them to save their own world, you know. So so when you get those really rewarding experiences, and hopefully you have enough of those, that it counteracts the really hard moments, because there are really hard moments, but hopefully the successful moments outweigh the hard moments, you know. So and it just, you know, at the end of the day, it just, you know, when you have those really great days, you just, wow, I rock. I think I made a difference today, you know, and it just feels good.
Thank you so much. So what I heard you describe there is that you went into this maybe a bit naively, as many people do, thinking my job is here to kind of save the world, right? But you've learned over time, as you've developed in your profession, you've learned over time that your role is really to help folks figure out what they want and empower them to save that. But when you see that happen, that gives you such joy. That gives you such energy. Did I get that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Let me also, if I could, just reflect back for a second, Carrie, because I'm having the benefit of watching you as you describe this, and your entire facial expression and even body language completely changed when you talked about that satisfaction of when you make a difference. And I just wanted to let you know that I observed that and felt it as you were describing it to me.
Wow. Good, because it does, I do feel that way. Yeah.
Great. So it was congruent with what you were telling me.
Yeah.
So I want to go back, if I could, Carrie, to one part of what you just described, because you were talking about the satisfaction, but you also mentioned, but there's some really challenges and difficulties in doing this. So I'm wondering if you could talk to me a little bit about that. What are some of the challenges, the real challenges day to day of doing the kind of work that you've chosen to do?
Well, you know, sometimes you can be working with families and providing them with all types of resources. And these are now the stories that the family advocates are sharing with me, because as I stated, I'm no longer doing the direct services. So they'll share with me, you know, gosh, I've given them this and this and this, or I've called them 4 times and they don't answer, they don't respond. And it's really hard because, you know, they're trying so hard to connect the families with what they need in order to be successful, and they don't get that buy-in or response from the family. And sometimes that can be really defeating to the advocate, you know. So it's like, I get it, you know, and it helps that I've been there and I've done this work personally, because I get that feeling of feeling defeated, but you can't always make them. Sometimes they're not ready, you know, they're not ready, even though they're the ones that have reached out initially to our services, and then it turns out that they're really not ready to receive the services that we could provide for them. And so it's like, just, you've done all that you can, take a deep breath, you know, there's plenty of others that are responding. And so focus on that.
Gotcha. I appreciate that. So you're describing how collectively this frustration that you can hear at times when your advocates are working with families and trying to provide that support, but for whatever reason, the family isn't ready for that in what way, and how frustrating that can be for your advocates who really want to help and support. Is that right? Yeah. Do you ever feel defeated sometimes?
Oh, jeez. Where do we start? Yes, sometimes, I mean, yes, because, I always have felt like it's my job to fix things, as a professional and as a personal, and sometimes you can't fix things. And one of the hardest things is to do that reflection and to say, what do you think? What do you think you should do? How do you feel you should handle this? Even though I want to jump in and say, this is what you should do, but I know you should not shit all over people. So I really try to practice that. And so it's like, hold back and let this person talk to me, and let's see if they can figure this out as they're talking to me. So being on this opposite side now as a supervisor, it's remembering to practice reflective practice and not jumping in. And that can be frustrating because you want to, I have a long time in the field, let me tell you what to do. And it's like, nope, hold back, and let that person talk and see if they can figure that out on their own, and then support them in that decision that they're making. So yeah, it's frustrating. Yeah.
I really appreciate that. I feel like you let me in on and gave me a real insight into what that challenge is for you. So again, just to make sure I followed it, and these are my words, not yours, but what I heard in that is that one of the challenges, one of the sometimes maybe even frustration points, is when you can sort of see what it is the advocate could be doing, right? But you've learned over time that the power comes from letting the advocate find that for themselves, and holding yourself back from giving them the answer as opposed to letting them find the answer on their own through your support. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it intellectually, but the challenge, if I heard you right, was I know it in my head, but boy, sometimes I still want to just kind of go there, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do you keep yourself from going there? What have you learned about yourself that allows you to, probably not perfectly, but allows you to, by and large, keep that line between what you impulsively want to do versus what is going to be best for the staff?
When I was given the opportunity to have this position that I have now, and this is kind of full circle for me, so starting out as a family advocate, all of the many years of experience that I've had, and now this is my first time being in this type of a leadership role in an organization. So it was like, okay, Carrie, this is your opportunity to bring everything you have learned in 40 years of good managers and not so good managers, and what worked and what didn't work. And I remember that feeling of having managers that didn't reflect with me, that I didn't feel safe with. I felt guilted if I cried. There's no crying in baseball, kind of a thing. And so it was like, for me, it's like I wanted to bring that best forward and see if in this small time that I have left of my career, I could really practice what I know works. But it's hard. It's really hard. I mean, and I have to say, if I'm doing my own self-reflection, I probably learned more from the bad managers than I did from the good ones, because it was like, I remembered those strong feelings of what that felt like. And so I want to make sure that I'm not doing that forward.
Thank you so much. I have so much respect for what you just described there, and using your own life and career experiences, right, to inform, if I got you right, to inform how you now serve in this role that you have. You have an opportunity to change that dynamic so others don't experience some of what you did, and you really want to take advantage of that. We have just about a minute or two. to go, Carrie, and you touched on this earlier, but if you're comfortable, I'd like to ask you to say just a bit more. So given all of that, you've described this job, tremendous responsibility, lots of challenges, some real difficulties at times that you have to kind of face, and yet you do this. You come into work every single day still and do this. What drives you to keep moving forward and doing this?
I just really believe in this work, and I believe in the strengths of families, and I believe in the importance of finding those strengths in families. You know, I trained for 8 years on the strengthening families and 5 protective factors concept of all families have strengths. And so I just, when you see that and when you're able to help families identify their strengths and build on that, it just gives you so much joy. I don't know the word. It just, I don't know the word that I want to use to describe what that feels like. And I see that in the advocates. I love when they're sharing their successes as well as their challenges. When they're able to articulate, oh my gosh, I got this family and they did this and this and that, you know, and so I'm getting my joy now through them and the work that they're doing and the times that we have to share. That picture of, you know, them drowning in, you know, pizza party was really powerful. And it was like, oh my gosh, how often do we do that? And how important it is to remember that it's more than, and those are important. It's important to have the pizza parties, but it's so much deeper than that. And so, I don't know, I'm just kind of rambling. So
I'm not going to let you do that to yourself.
Okay. All right.
You actually did a beautiful job of both verbally and I could sense there are times when words just aren't there, but I could see it in you and feel it in you.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate you going there with me. I really do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for this opportunity.
Oh, thank you so much for your generosity in making yourself vulnerable and doing this with me. I really appreciate it. So first thing, I'm going to take a deep breath if you would like to, as we transition here. A couple of things, Carrie, before we open it up and we talk to everyone else about what their experience was. I have a couple of quick questions for you as we wrap up. Now we're out of our demonstration mode. First of all, did I ask any question that felt inappropriate or not something that would be something that should be asked in a work environment in any way?
No, I did not feel any of that. Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure of that. And secondly, how often do you get to talk about the things that I asked you about? Yeah.
Not often, because you hit the ground running every single day and you're putting out fires every single day, and just the chance to just relax for a few moments and really debrief and talk just really felt good.
Good. I am so glad. Well, it was incredible honor and privilege for me to spend these minutes talking with you and to learn about what you're doing. And I have so much respect for you. So thank you so much for being willing to do this. Now I'm going to give you the best gift I can give you, which is you can take me off of pin. You can go up to view mode, and if you go back to gallery mode, you should get, and folks can turn their cameras back on so we can see everybody. And there we go. I'm seeing your faces come across. All right. So I'm going to turn it over to Melissa, who's going to facilitate the conversation around the observation.
Thanks, Al. And thank you, Carrie, so much for participating in that. Just give a little round of applause. We really, really appreciate that. And we see some in the chat as well. So for those that have the privilege to observe that interaction, we'd just love to hear from you a little bit. What did you see or observe that Al did? Again, we're going to just focus on Al's part here to create that reflective space. Anything that you noticed that Al did in that conversation. And again, you can just take yourself off mute, or you can throw stuff into the chat as well.
One of the things that I noticed with Al watching his facial expressions was just that he was encouraging, but it wasn't like reactive. So it wasn't like or anything different, but he just kept that calm composure to him, and just, you know, like, I'm just a welcoming person that you're just telling me all this. And then, you know, so that part was really, a couple times I would have like, oh, so I really liked watching his facial expressions.
Thanks so much, Lana. Is it Lana? Am I saying that right?
It's Lana, but it's good.
Lana, thank you for correcting me. Absolutely. I think, you know, that nonverbal can be so important, especially when we're talking about staff bringing some big emotions into the work, and how important it is to not just match that intensity sometimes, but for us to be able to regulate in that way. So I really appreciate that comment.
I also appreciated that Al had created a safer space by walking us through the entire process, and then during the reflective listening and the session, there was one question that he said, I'm going to ask a really big question, and if I could, just asking for that permission makes it a lot safer. And the acknowledgements that he followed after Carrie shared her work, that was really powerful for me.
Thanks, Eva. Absolutely. So that idea of asking permission before going into asking a question. And I think that speaks to this idea of also transparency, which I really appreciate. And then following up, which is huge, right? A lot of times we ask questions and then we just kind of, how are you doing? And then we're done. And that follow-up is really where the work is. So I think that's really, really great. Just going to acknowledge some comments in the chat too. Rita shared asking open-ended questions. So that's definitely one of the important components of reflective supervision, right? We know that those questions garner so much more information than something like a yes or no. And so again, letting that individual be able to go where they want. So asking those open-ended questions. Cheryl summarizing what she had said. And so that's a really, really big piece of it. Again, it seems kind of a small thing, but that's really what helps us feel heard, right? So we're not just going in and fixing, we're not coming up with solutions right away. We're just letting that person feel heard. And the tool for doing that is, like we saw with Al, summarizing what the other person was sharing. Complete attention and validation, which is a huge piece. We'll talk a little bit about this when we get into some of the specifics, but we have to remember too how we're doing, right? If we are doing this and we are opening up space and asking these emotion-focused questions, these open-ended questions to our staff, are we in a space to hear that, right? Do we have the bandwidth? Do we have the attention span? Because if we don't, then that's not going to be a genuine interaction, right? If you know you have a meeting in 3 minutes and you're like, yeah, sure, what's up? That's going to be a tense conversation, right? So it's okay for us to say, hey, I think I really want to hear what you have to share. It's going to be really important to me, but I want to make sure I have the time to do that. So I think that's a really great point, making sure that we have the attention span to be able to have those conversations. Also here, I was completely present and calm, using that active listening and reflecting what he heard, naming emotions Carrie shared. So Anne-Marie, that's an absolutely, I think that's such a really powerful tool. Again, one of those things that can maybe feel small, but for somebody that's having all the emotions, they don't know what's going on, we can feel really overwhelmed. We've got multiple feelings happening. For someone else to say, wow, it sounds like you're feeling really scared, or it sounds like you're feeling really hurt by that. It can be really powerful, and it can help ground us as well. So that's a really, really important tool as well. So thanks for putting that out. He said thank you, which is very important, absolutely. Being present, and that body language is warm and inviting. And again, we know these things, we want to have good body language, we want to ask open-ended questions. Again, these are really, really important skills, and sometimes it can be hard for us to pay attention to all that. So again, really thinking about this as something intentional, really thinking about this as something purposeful, making sure we have that time and space and checking with ourselves when we're trying to do this work. So I think all of those are really, really great examples of what I was doing.
Can I
Great
say,
feedback. Please.
all right, I just thought it was really nice watching it because I do work remote 100% of the time, basically. And so these kind of interactions are happening with me, with my staff via Zoom. And so really watching how he was doing that gave me a better idea of how I need to be role modeling that and how I need to be doing that. So it's one thing when we're all in the group, but I just really like seeing it via the internet and online.
Thanks. It's great. And just to be clear, and I should have said this at the beginning, but I think you all sort of figured that out. We are not suggesting that every supervision or every interaction with your staff be all of what you just saw there, right? That was just an opportunity to show you a variety of reflective questions in a condensed sort of way. But even with that, and I'm going to blame Carrie for this, it went longer than it normally does. But probably, what did we go, Melissa? Was it closer to 15 than 10 minutes?
Yeah, it was
okay.
Around there, in between.
Yeah. Only because Carrie was so fascinating, I kept wanting to ask more questions. So it was self-serving that it went longer. But even there, we went 10 or 12 minutes. And look what happened in just that period of time. Imagine if once a month, even once a quarter, I had an opportunity to have 10 or 12 minutes with my staff to get that kind of experience with them. So I do understand that there's a lot on your plate, but I also do believe that this is something that doesn't take that much time and energy, and the payoff could be so huge. But it's a matter of, again, being mindful about it and trying to figure out where to put it as well. This was done in a very mindful, dedicated way. But the reflective questions can come up in the middle of a process as well. You don't have to start that way. Somebody's telling you a lot about a case that's going on or a challenge or a struggle that they're having. You can throw a reflective question in there in addition to the procedural questions that are being asked. Another thing, and we ended with it, Carrie and I, where I asked Carrie what's called a compassion satisfaction question, right? We talked about difficulties and challenges, and then we ended with what gives you joy or meaning or purpose. Those are called compassion satisfaction. Well, there is vicarious trauma, secondary trauma that we can get from this work. We absorb the trauma of others. That's part of the hazard of doing our job. We also absorb the privilege and the joy of watching people grow and change. And that's a unique privilege that we get in these positions. And we find many times that organizations don't ask about either side of that continuum. They don't ask about the emotional struggle. They also don't ask about the joy and the meaning and the purpose. Even one of my introductory questions to Carrie, I often get feedback from people who say, you know, most of the people that I work with, and I've worked here for 15, 20 years, have no idea why I got into this field. No one's ever asked me that. Why do I just do in general? Why did I pick this of all the careers and professions in the world? Why did I pick? Nobody's ever asked me that. And yet I've worked here forever, right? Those kinds of questions, those could be thrown out at a staff meeting. An icebreaker question. One or two people willing to say what got you into doing this sort of work, that to the extent you're comfortable with it, setting your own boundaries with it. That's a lovely compassion, satisfaction, reflective question that could just be integrated into a meeting that has all kinds of other agenda items to it as well. So you can weave this in wherever it feels right for you.
Absolutely. So we're gonna, we think the demonstration is a really powerful way to see it, so we know what we're talking about, but we're also have some slides to share that kind of breaks down what we just did so that you have that for your own resources. So we're just gonna spend the last, time flew by, 10 minutes that we have together going over that and providing some resources around this as well. All right. So like you guys nailed already, all of these kind of areas, we break it down, reflective supervision, into kind of these components that we think can be helpful to think about when practicing this. So that first piece is these emotion-focused questions. So you heard Al ask a lot of those reflective questions, right? We know the work we do evokes feelings. Let's ask and open the space up. So we have this slide here that offers some examples of these reflective questions that you can use in your work. And like Al said, sprinkle them in when it feels appropriate. Maybe it's an icebreaker at the beginning of a group meeting. Maybe it's in an individual supervision and you start off with it. Maybe someone's talking about a case and you see, okay, this is an important time to check in about the feelings around the work. So these are just some kind of samples. Again, you all have your own style, your own language that you'll put to this that'll make it feel genuine to you and real to you. But these are some kind of reminder kind of questions and examples that folks can use around bringing up and opening up this space for folks to share their feelings. Another thing that we heard that you guys all commented on in the chat is this concept of reflective listening. So again, we just wanted to make sure we documented this language here for you as well. Again, this practice of listening, summarizing, and clarifying what the other person is sharing. So just some sample language here, like what I heard you say is XYZ, is that correct? It sounds like you're feeling really overwhelmed. Is that right? Did I get that right? Again, this checking in that you all noticed I'll do can be really powerful. So again, some language, some sampling here around those reflective moments. We talked briefly earlier about how this isn't therapy, right? This isn't counseling. And so what do we do if we do start to open up the space to talk about feelings and it veers into a space that's not around the work, right? So it's not about the joy of my work, or it's not about the challenging or the difficulty about my work, but it's about other things, let's say, or those emotions are really big that we feel, I'm not sure what to do here. This isn't maybe my space anymore. I feel like that has crossed a line or a boundary. Now what do I do? There's a lot of things we can do. One is to ask that person, what supports do you need? What supports do you have that you can turn to? A lot of times people do know their own supports, and it helps, I think, veer that away from us being the support. So what supports outside of work can you turn to? But another really important area is this idea of an EAP, if that's something you have in your family resource centers, if there are referrals you have on hand for counseling or therapy. Again, reminding us of our own boundaries. We all have that gut feeling inside that I want us all to trust when we're doing this, when it feels like, okay, this is maybe crossing a line. And I think the thing to really take home and keep in our mind is it about the work? Is what we're talking about as the emotions that are coming up around the work, positive or negative? Okay, I'm going through these quickly, so I'll jump in if there's something we're missing here. One thing we talked about in the beginning is this idea of the power of ourselves and using ourselves as models and how powerful that can be as leaders, as supervisors, as managers, in our own behavior, in our own actions, in our own self-care. But also we can use this in our supervision, in our conversation, in our communication with others as well. So for folks that might be a little hesitant to share, maybe this is not something that's really done in your organization, we haven't really talked about feelings, and that can be a little uncomfortable. How can we use our own experiences to help make that maybe feel a bit safer for folks? So I know when I had that case, I really struggled, and I was thinking about that a lot, and it was impacting how I was, dealing outside of work. Just want to check in. Is that something that you're experiencing? It might not be, but I know for me, it was a bit of a struggle. Again, using our own experiences, our own examples to help model that this is okay. I feel that too. And it's an okay space to talk about that, right? So using our own experiences, our own feelings and modeling that can really help normalize that situation and make it feel a bit safer for folks that might be a little bit hesitant to engage in these kind of conversations.
Couple things on that. One thing that we always like to add to that, there can be a slippery slope between modeling and then all of a sudden it becoming all about you. So we do need to be conscious of that, right? This is not our time to share and tell all of our war stories now to someone else. It is supposed to be about them. So am I sharing this right now because I think it will help my staff kind of dispel some of the fear or anxiety they might have about acknowledging the emotion, and by me showing them that I have some of that, it will open it up? Or am I just doing it because I want somebody else to hear of all of the stuff I've done in the past? So just kind of keep that in mind. The other thing, and this is for all of this, but talking about it here reminds me to put it out there. It is also very important, if you are going to do this, and this isn't the way that you've worked before, and even if it is, our belief is reflective supervision is an invitation for staff to go there. It is not a mandate. Some staff may say, I don't want to talk about my feelings around this. That's not that I'm just, for whatever reason, it is not a mandate, and it should not be a mandate. I'm going to still ask that periodically, even with staff that say, I don't do that feeling stuff. I can't believe you keep asking me that, but I am going to keep asking that. it's not to put pressure on you, but it's to remind you that somewhere down the road, you may get to a place where there is a situation going on and you do want to talk about the feeling related to it. And if you do, I want you to know that that's okay to do it here. It's also okay to say to me, nope, no feeling on that one. Let's move to the next. That's fine. So it's not a mandate, it's an invitation.
Thanks, Al. So again, here, just providing some sample language to look back on that might be helpful around this modeling piece. I wish we had more time to talk about compassion satisfaction, but Al mentioned it and we got to see it in the demonstration. Again, just keeping in mind that when we talk about reflective practice and reflective supervision, we're talking about reflecting on the challenging feelings of the work we do, but also on the joy and how can we create space for that. So we've got some prompts here that folks can use. And some of the work we've done with different organizations, they've used it to open a meeting or to close a meeting, especially some of those maybe tensor meetings. In cases or in times where things have gone kind of awry and are really difficult, how can we pick out one thing that you're proud of, even though it didn't really go as we wanted it to? So there's lots of different ways we can create space for talking about the joy and the pride that folks have in their work.
Two things, Melissa. Somebody asked if you go back to the previous slide for a second. So they were trying to capture something, I think. And secondly, on the compassion satisfaction, I also suggest even when a staff is talking about a very challenging case or a case where they feel like they blew it or they didn't do so well or it didn't turn out so well, allow that to all happen. That's important and you don't want to diminish that. There's learning from all of that. But even at the end of that, I will say to somebody, and despite all of that, despite all the things where you thought there was a misconnect and it didn't work out well and you could have done better, my guess is there was still something you did well in all of that. What is it? Because we are our own worst enemies. We get into this binary thinking, right? And we think, oh my God, I just blew it all. I was just a horrible social worker or a horrible advocate. And that's not true. So we have to remind, even in bad situations, there might have been some really good things that happened that we can learn from as well.
I noticed the time, but I do want to make sure we, this is a handout that you guys will be provided, that Caltrin will provide to you all. So it's kind of like a quick guide or a desk guide you can keep at your desk, and it goes through all of the different areas of reflective practice and reflective supervision that we just went through and that Al demonstrated. So it goes over reflective listening, those emotion-focused questions, compassion satisfaction, all of those pieces. It has a definition of what we're talking about, a prompt that you can use in some sample language. So again, just a resource, hopefully you'll never forget anything Al and I shared during this time together. But in case you do, a month or two down the road, hopefully this is a helpful resource for folks. Okay, well, we went all the way to the minute where I know we're a minute over. Thank you guys so much for your participation, your engagement, hearing your stories, hearing your experiences. It's a privilege for us to be able to hear that, and I think it really helps benefit our time together overall. So thank you for all the great work that you all do, and thank you guys so much.
And thanks, Carrie, again, so much for being our volunteer. We appreciate it. Thank you all.